Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, Capital One Bank, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, AmTrust Title, Ariel Property Advisors. Additional funding has been provided by AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Citizens Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization, Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott, Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Meringoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Organization, Moynihan Capital Partners, and these friends.
In the continuation of the discussion of the opportunities of development and where could you develop and different perspectives, I'm once again bringing my guests from the prior week to the show today. My guests today include Toby Moskovich, who is the principal and CEO of Heritage Equities. The city planner, my friend Regina Meyer, who's president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. And last but not least, co-founder and the CEO of LNL Mag, Marianne Gilmartin. So we were saying before, we were talking about different opportunities and different things. Since I am the older person in the room, okay, the baby boomer, I see one opportunity with regard to assisted living, senior housing in the city. Do you see that as an opportunity that you would get involved with? I mean, right now we have 2 new luxury assisted senior housing developments being built, one on 56th Street and Lexington Avenue and one on 92nd Street and 3rd Avenue and 2nd Avenue. And I believe somebody's trying to do something like that in downtown Brooklyn, right?
I've heard. I haven't seen that deal close.
So as a planner and as individuals involved in development, and we've seen it work, people want to downsize, people want to be closer to their family, they don't want to be in Florida, they want to be over here. They also want to have the great opportunities of the health care that you're afforded in the metropolitan area. Do you see that as an opportunity for you in downtown Brooklyn?
Well, I think it's a natural in terms of neighborhood evolution that people want services or want to stay where they are. I mean, just in terms of what New York City needs to offer for its generations, it makes sense.
With an aging population and the fact that people want to be in cities more now than ever, intuitively it makes real sense. And I think it's challenging for all New Yorkers to find affordable housing, and I think if there's a way to do it.
What I'm talking about is not even really affordable housing. I'm talking about the 2 developments specifically that are being built in Manhattan are not affordable. They're luxury, okay? Where they're looking for is the person who owned the home, okay? Perhaps even somebody who owned the home on Ocean Parkway, who wants to have their family over here. They want to be in Brooklyn, and they want to be in a luxury assisted living or community care facility going on. I'm talking about that type. I mean, I think there's a definite problem that New York City has an affordability problem in general.
For seniors too in particular, but I recognize you're talking about something altogether different. I don't know enough about that segment of the market to know whether there's enough demand. I would say that generally building luxury in this city, it's a different price point. It requires paying a certain price for land, where at this particular juncture in those locations, those sites have to be pegged at condominium prices, right?
Sure,
So,
they are.
So how the economics work on a model like that, if you're not selling a unit, but you're renting it and you're having a continuum of care available to you, it has to be fairly pricey, just because the economics and the highest and best use for sites in those locations have to be, for the most part, condominiums.
How did you decide to build an office building in Williamsburg?
So like I mentioned before, I started in the venture capital business, so I knew, still actively involved with, particularly with an organization called Springboard, Women in Tech. And when I came to Williamsburg, initially started developing residential. In 2009, 10, and 11, there really weren't many people active in the market. And then when Sam Zell made his purchase in early 2011, all of a sudden money started to flow freely. Residential developers came back, things got very expensive. And I went to look for another way to continue to develop in the neighborhood, and discovered commercial development. And one thing in particular, I owned for a time a piece on North 6th Street, which was a real thoroughfare. People would walk from the subway to the waterfront, the bars, the restaurants, all along North 6th Street down to White and Kent. And I owned a building there that had the Urban Outfitters in now, and at that point was an American Apparel. And on the second floor, right above American Apparel, when I walked in there, when I was looking at the building, I saw what could have been a tech company in San Francisco. And they're actually still in the neighborhood. It's a company called Full Six. It was sort of almost quintessential. They were sitting around in Adirondack chairs, and I said to the founders and the owners, I'm like, who are you? Where did you come from? They're like, well, we live here in the neighborhood, and we have friends that are tucked away in corners on top of bodegas. And what I realized was that there really weren't options if people wanted to work in the neighborhood. Shortly thereafter, Toby's Estate Coffee opened, which is now an informal coffee shop, shared
Any
workspace.
relationship with the other Toby?
No, it's a great great Australian coffee company. And the idea that I had was, well, nobody wanted to buy commercial property in the commercial district, which was Regina, so forward-looking, had made sure it wasn't rezoned residential. And I said, what if I just buy a site, put up a 2-story building, and make some beautiful open space workspaces for people to rent? And that was really the idea. And when I got the contract, originally we were paying about $180 a square foot. And I remember where I was. I got a call from Ofer Cohn, and he says, somebody's buying this site at this price. It can only be you. What's your plan? And that was my plan. And it was early in the day, and like as Marianne mentioned, being a developer is constantly slaying dragons. It was very challenging. Nobody really believed that there were tenants, even in the beginning when we approached city planning. We had to work really hard once we came up with the idea of getting the site rezoned. Number one. Number two is the site was encumbered, so I had to find the tenant, which was Sunbelt Rentals, a new site in Maspeth, help them negotiate a lease, build out their space for them in order to move them out. And then we had the challenge and the opportunity of learning the beauty of public-private partnerships and getting my first rezoning done, having never spoken to a politician, never engaged at all with city government. And it was a tremendous learning experience, and really made some great friends and learned a lot about how city government can help economic development locally.
Toby, I'm just curious about your capital, how patient that capital must have been, and how you were able to pull it together. Because of course for commercial, you need pre-leasing of some sort to get financing.
So, I've been fortunate to find entrepreneurial investors who I think in the beginning maybe they were betting against me. They, on the lending side, they thought I might not be able to pull it off. And over time, as I proved myself finding additional pockets, I think back, actually the family, it was a private family that lent me the money on the 25 Kent site. I don't know if I would have believed in myself. I ended up getting an LOI from a potential tenant, so a lot of what was there was obvious in the market. I was able to show them other sites, but in the traditional metrics of how people raise money and how developers secure debt, none of those traditional obvious channels were available. So there were a lot of moments when I had to have a lot of real confidence in my ability to execute and where the neighborhood was going.
I mean, in the same manner, Mary Ann, years ago, Metrotech was a question. I mean, looking back, very few people said True Bear Stearns needed it, but was an opportunity.
Well, I'll tell you that back in the day, 20 years plus, Koch would insist that companies go over the bridge to look at space at Metro Tech to be incentivized to stay in New York and reduce their occupancy costs. And we'd receive them on the other side of the bridge, and they would jump out of their limousines, they'd walk around and get back in and head over the bridge, and we'd never see them again. And I'll never forget that, I think I can tell this story just because the head of Bear Stearns is no longer around. When Bear Stearns was in Brooklyn and I went to renew them, we had a dispute over the rent, and I had to go to the CEO's office on Madison Avenue. And when I sat down, he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, we're bickering over about $1 in rent, but I'm here to get the buck because we need the $1 in rent." And it pales in comparison to the amount of rent you're paying in Midtown. And he said, "The people in Brooklyn could be in Calcutta for all I care." And he used an explicative too. And I thought to myself, wow, that's how Brooklyn was viewed from a corporate point of view. The idea
So
that
when did Brooklyn become? I mean, I'm a Brooklyn-born person, and I say to some of the people I went to college in downtown Brooklyn. I said, you know, I remember 50 years on Flatbush Avenue, nothing happened.
well, escaping Brooklyn was a definition of success, and now
That's
people
right.
want to get into Brooklyn to be deemed successful. So I think for those of us that have been living it, I think the fairest way to describe it is we don't quite know exactly what happened, but certainly the rezoning was a big piece of it. The proliferation of amenitized high-rise living. I mean, you could live in Brooklyn, but if you wanted to have your dry cleaning picked up and dropped off and never know who cleaned your clothes, you were out of luck.
I mean,
in
when
Brooklyn for a
even when
long
the
time.
Oro opened up, you know,
Do you remember? Yeah.
the Oro was a failure because it was nothing that was there. There was no amenity.
Well, they also started with condos. We built 80 DeKalb, which was the first 80-20 in Brooklyn, other than the one that was built in Brooklyn Heights. And we oversized the units, and we amenitized the building, and we made a higher quality product. And it was so well received. I mean, DeKalb's a great street. I think it was the beginning of something that took hold for people who wanted to live in Brooklyn but didn't want to live in brownstones or older buildings.
So where are the opportunities today to develop, or is there still opportunities? And I heard Toby with regard to Williamsburg, and I'm pretty certain that things are going to work out over there. The greatest, everybody's talking about the Bronx. The Bronx is big. The Bronx is great. You know, there are opportunities. But as my friend Jeff Levine says, there's still crime in the Bronx. It's still...
Well, first of all, everything's relative, and the Bronx, that's a sweeping generalization. I would say that I build in scale. So when you build scale, you have to look for ways to assemble land and to build in the hundreds of thousands of square feet. And in that way, I believe you follow the artists and the food. And that's the sign of the next location. And I think that Queens is certainly well on its way to being a place where people want to be, and it's cheaper than Brooklyn. I think the Bronx has a lot of attributes, including what we talked about earlier, which is transit and accessibility. And you know, in terms of crime is so low in the city, and I think that the notion of turning a corner and being in a bad neighborhood, locations, you know, dislocation, it doesn't happen anymore.
I mean, look, I believe that the Inwood section of Manhattan has great opportunities, and people are talking about a lot of millennials moving there. And I think, as we said, anything that's transit-oriented, I think, is really a valuable situation.
I like the people who think that the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land. For people like us, that's a great way for people to look at it, because if you are willing to go in and be a pioneer, you know, chance favors the prepared mind, and there's a way for you to look at places that are on the cusp. Looking at Newark right now, I mean, we're talking about New York, but you know, Newark's very interesting. It's Brooklyn 20 years ago. And as the rings of cities are pushed outward and people need to move further out from the city center to afford the quality of life they want to have, I think some of these tertiary locations outside of New York are pretty compelling.
Newark is definitely growing. I had dinner last night with many people who have offices in Newark, and they were saying Hoboken has a new mayor.
That's right.
Who happens to be very pro-development as opposed to the previous mayor who was anti-development. I think Bayonne has great opportunities also.
Look at Audible. Audible's in Newark, and the head of Audible gives the employees stipends to move into Newark. And there's 1,000 young tech entrepreneurs working inside of Audible, and you go inside their headquarters, and it's chock full of energy and excitement, and it's in the heart of Newark.
Yeah, and I think to comment just to your question before about sort of what are the roots of success of Brooklyn, and I think also New York recovering after the Great Recession, And a lot of it goes back to what happened during the Bloomberg administration and work that Regina oversaw and some of her compatriots, where there was a moment in time where financial services was shrinking, was moving out into Jersey, and there were real aggressive steps taken to bring the tech industry to New York beyond just a sales office. And that really was a big piece of what seeded things here. Google getting to a place where they have thousands of workers, Facebook and other companies. And many of those young people wanted to live in the outer boroughs. And I think you're seeing the second wave of that now. If you look, for example, in Bushwick, one of the main companies in the blockchain industry is right off of the Morgan Avenue stop on Morgan Avenue. And it's similar to what Marianne described, the feeling of energy at Audible in New Jersey. I think the second wave for Brooklyn, which is the result of what everybody sitting here has done, so the public work that Regina's done in the parks, in Brooklyn Heights, and then it's certainly the idea, how many times have I been to the Barclays Center?
The Two Trees Park.
Domino Park is amazing.
Fantastic.
Is fantastic. Something which I've seen, and I've done a couple of shows recently on the season, is that the extensive amount of technology in real estate today, I see as a great opportunity. There are many dynamic companies who've come out and been in the real estate tech. Are you involved with any of them?
I think that real estate is the last frontier for disruption. I think it's ripe for disruption. I think it's not happened on the scale that it will happen. And so whether it's what Sidewalk Labs is doing, Josh Seifman and Dan Doctoroff, or just sitting on panels with people who come in with a full suite of technology for multifamily builders, so that they come in and they wire up the apartments, and so it's all controlled with an app on your phone. And all of this we could do ourselves, but I think the disruption is probably going to happen from outside the industry. But there are a number of entrepreneurs that are bringing to our business smart, savvy technology.
Right, and there are a number of families, as we would once say that there were the 5 families of real estate, the old line families, who are like the Rudin family, the Silverstein organization, who are making a commitment into tech for real estate. And I think that's a great opportunity. And I think that's a great opportunity just for downtown Brooklyn, I think for Williamsburg, and in general.
So we host a quarterly event at the Williamsburg Hotel where real estate tech companies present. And I've actually started working with some of them. One example is Hello Alfred, which is a great building concierge services company that we put them into one of our buildings. Consensus, which is one of the leading players in the blockchain industry, just presented last week on their real estate platform. So I think that that's going to be continued to be a big driver of companies staying in New York and wanting to be in New York to engage with the real estate industry.
Yeah, we also do a lot of highlighting of real estate tech through the partnership, make sure that our members really get a sense of what's available. And I think the first step has been people interested in making amenities available to their tenants using tech. But I think the next steps are going to happen. We're seeing it also in financing and rent, and also in guarantees. So this will definitely happen, as both Toby and Marianne said.
Last year we had record number of visitors to New York City in general. I think it was 62 million visitors. So how do we see the hospitality industry? What's your views on the hospitality industry?
Well, I think we're all in the hospitality business now. I think whether you're building office buildings for the future or you're building multifamily or condominiums, even retail, the fact is that people have an expectation for experiential living. And the way that amenity spaces are being designed inside multifamily buildings or condominiums today is nothing short of remarkable. I mean, there's the common spaces that we're building to allow people to be part of community. When you think about how much it costs to live in the city, people would much rather, students, young people would much rather spend what they have to spend for a very small, efficient micro unit and come downstairs and have ample community space and living space to be in partnership with their peers. And so whether you're building great rooms or chef kitchens or co-working spaces inside of residential buildings, I think it's the way of the future. I mean, let's be honest, the idea of staying home and working in your pajamas, it didn't work out so well. It's because people want to be with other people.
I mean,
and I'll echo what Marianne said. So I have a building off of Franklin Avenue. It's right near the subway, very close to great retail on Franklin Avenue, and we put in there a tremendous amount of amenities. There's a shared workspace. We have a screening room. You could basically come, but it's 2018 version of working at home. You drop the pajamas, you can have business meetings or conference rooms there. So I agree, as a hotelier who also owns residential buildings and then building a similar amenity package into commercial buildings, it's really about being in the hospitality business and people having the right experience, whether it's where they live, where they work, or where they play. You're going to see a lot more of that.
I mean, with all of the hotels that have been built and under construction in downtown Brooklyn, are we over-hoteled?
No, we're not. The hotel demand is really high. We're finally seeing new luxury hotels like Toby's, one hotel down at the waterfront. And now Ace Hotel is going to be making a splash on Skimmerhorn Street, finally starting to get out of the ground. And I think that this really shows that there's a center for tourism in Brooklyn.
I believe that New York City is still under-retailed in many markets. I think it's the question.
I think
Urban
Brooklyn,
retail.
yeah, Brooklyn's a great example of where retail's going. I think in the same way in which Soho became the center of destination retail for a lot of brands, we're seeing something similar play out in Williamsburg. And if you haven't been to BMW space, it's a combination of a restaurant, ADO, it's a incubator and a shared workspace. So it's a representation of their brand. Adidas opened something very similar a few blocks away from them also in Williamsburg, where they had their whole design team and customers were able to come and create custom shoes. And then we have Ralph Lauren, who opened the vintage clothing store in Williamsburg. So I think that the experience is changing, and a lot of that innovation is happening in the outer boroughs.
And in the downtown, we're seeing demand. We need more food. We need more amenities. That's the really interesting part about having all the thousands of housing units come online this year.
What about the topic of food halls? I mean, downtown, all of a sudden, you have a couple of food halls.
City Point, I think, brought it to a new level. It's the city's largest food hall, and it really looks like it's here to stay. It's almost hard to believe it's only a year old.
Right, I was with Aaron a week ago that they're doing great.
It's also remarkable because the tender care and feeding that went into who was in that food hall, below grade when compared to street level food halls that are struggling in the same borough, it's really a referendum on how thoughtful is the curation of the food itself and how particular are people in Brooklyn. We know authentic food, and you really need to be mindful of the level of sophistication, I think, of the consumer.
And you can't forget the original food hall, which is the Smorgasburg, and their permanent space at 1,000 Dean Street, which is
Right.
right down the street from my building.
What about the Midtown rezoning?
I'm very happy that JP Morgan is going to take advantage of it and build.
And also 405 is going to take advantage, 405 Park Avenue.
And 425, which my partners undertook with the hope that Midtown zoning would pass in time for it, and then it didn't happen. I think that the average life of an office building in New York City approaches 70 years. And something has to give, and we need 21st century buildings if we're going to call ourselves a 21st century city. And so I'm hopeful that the Midtown zoning will spur the construction of new, highly sophisticated 21st century product.
What's happening with regard to the Brooklyn Navy Yard? What's your thoughts about that with the new 670,000 square foot building opening up there?
Well, Building 77 is a home run. I mean, now with Lafayette 148 and Nanette Lepore, the jewelry making, I mean, it's really at a different level now that they're really attracting people, not just companies from Manhattan, but they're really building a base there. And David Ehrenberg has really shown a lot of vision to what the next steps are going to be. It's tremendous how much is happening. And he's really opening the gates. Now Flushing Avenue isn't the barrier that it used to be.
Look, you also have Wegmans.
Right.
People love Wegmans, and when Wegmans opens up an 80,000 square foot store, there's no question it's going to change the neighborhood.
Yeah, David's also with New Lab. I think it's critical. So fashion is a very big deal, but New Lab has become a center of innovative manufacturing. They're doing high-tech motorcycles and other sorts of products. I think it's really creating this continuum of innovation that's going deeper, connecting downtown Brooklyn really and what's happening in Williamsburg and Greenpoint. So I think it's really critical.
And I think that companies are not going there just for a value proposition on dollars. It's because they're co-located with other companies that are involved in innovation and the digital economy. And that kind of connectivity to like-minded entrepreneurs is really important. And so
And-
you only have to walk through New Lab to see it and to say that it's not something that could easily be replicated because it's so thoughtful, and it's not something that I think you'd see in Midtown Manhattan. I
And that's
think
why
it's
this
something
is
that-
such a great moment.
It's the talent that's here, though, and the talent wants to be in the Navy Yard. The talent wants to be in Brooklyn. They live in Brooklyn, and now we're starting to see that throughout the borough. I mean, we have a Manhattan company that's moving, architecture company that's moving to our first Class A building
Right.
in downtown Brooklyn, FX Collaborative. This is such a headline for Brooklyn, but we need to continue to get those 21st century
If you look at it this
spaces.
way, Gary Barnett's building at City Point is doing rather well because it meets certain situations, lower taxes, no taxes for 25 years, and based on the situation right now with the Tax Reform Act, it's a great opportunity, and people want those amenities. And what's your thoughts about opportunities out in Long Island?
I'm betting on cities. I would say that I know that what RXR is doing and Scott Recker's belief that these suburban towns located again by transit and by the railroads.
Right. I mean, they have made a major commitment in Yonkers and New Rochelle, the master developers in both communities over there.
I think that I agree with Marianne. I think that cities are going to continue to be the wave of the future, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. New Lab, what's happening in downtown Brooklyn, the amazing work, in and around what Forest
See, but
City
our
has done.
biggest problem is if we don't have affordable housing, we can't do anything.
Agreed.
Okay? We need more affordable housing. So
this-
even if you have to build higher buildings, at least,
But the politics in the suburbs still have to be surmounted, and they're not there yet. We don't see a groundswell of people in Nassau and Suffolk saying that we have to work through the politics to get to the density. I mean, that's a pretty big
But in
conversation.
New York City, we need the affordability option.
We do.
We
You
don't
do.
have enough, especially, not everybody can afford to be in these new apartment buildings.
Well,
over there.
that's why
I mean, look at the options of when you opened up your building and you had a lottery. How many apartments?
Right.
90,000 applications.
Right.
But East New York has been rezoned, and there's very large tracts that have been assembled by Phipps and others, and that is a place where the city can build scale that really can be more affordable. And I think that's why the city spent so much time on East New York, because they knew that there was enough property there that could deliver thousands of units.
Do you see that potentially happening to Coney Island also? I mean, because we still have vacant land in Coney Island.
I think there's
Right.
an inevitability about
Yeah.
Coney Island. Again, if the city stays healthy.
What about
and
Red
strong.
Hook?
Red Hook has an access problem. I mean, the transportation has to be solved, and that's why the
Including
BQX...
possibly ferries. Ferries. as well.
Ferries,
Yeah.
You could
access.
say that, Regina, but if you think about the Navy Yard, I mean, it is not the easiest place to get to, and yet
Navy
it's
Yard
so
is as hard-
successful.
the
So
Navy
I
Yard
believe
is-
Red Hook has, some fundamental ingredients that are
What
super
kills me
compelling.
about Red Hook is you could solve the access problem by putting really great bus service through the tunnel, and
Sure,
there
right
you'd
in the
have
city,
and
right,
there
yeah.
you'd have everybody connected into Manhattan's
Even though we
transit
really want
system.
people to live and work in
In
Brooklyn, so
but
it's more about, if
so
it-
I don't think it's unsolvable. I just think
But
that
I-
somebody has to make a commitment, and I think
And I think we're on the way because I've heard it said no housing is affordable without a job, and I think the city and in particular Brooklyn is moving into sort of its moment of tremendous economic development and all of these projects and a lot of money coming in that is both funding new businesses. New York surpassed Boston in terms of venture capital dollars about 2 years ago. So a tremendous amount of money flowing in, and great new industries like blockchain, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. These are companies and industries that are real.
The healthcare world is huge in New York City today. It's just growing by leaps and bounds. And that's going to, the Proton Center is going to open up. Look at what's happened in Roosevelt Island. Great examples. And I think, the changes and the challenges and opportunities are going to be taking place by individuals sitting with me today. And I'd like to thank Toby, Regina, and Marianne, and I'll see you next week.